Welcome to First. I'm Shirley Min along with Michelle Polston and Mark Eichman. Delaware health officials hope the state drug treatment plan of the future looks a lot like a new facility now open in Harrington.
The Blood Bank of Delmarva hopes new technology now available will make the future of processing blood donations not only easier, but safer as well.
The science behind a distillery is there for all to see in Smyrna. No, they aren't making moonshine. This is a real Delaware Teach Me segment. First, your public media news magazine starts now.
Detox centers used to be places where you go to quit drugs and alcohol cold turkey. The model worked, but in many cases fell short when it came to long-term recovery. In this week's First Look, we take a tour of the state's newest detox facility in Harrington and examine the new approach that state health leaders hope will help people beat their addictions for good. Delaware's newest 28-bed drug detox facility in Harrington was almost full on the first day it started seeing clients in early November. Connections Community Support Programs runs the downstate center that, as it turns out, is about more than just detoxification.
There were people who would go to detox, they'd go and they'd get clean and they'd come back out and they wouldn't ever get any additional recovery supports. They'd eventually use again, sometimes within a matter of days. They'd go back to detox, they'd repeat the cycle.
Connection CEO Kathy McKay says some would detox 40 times in a year and be no better off in their recovery. That's why state health leaders stepped in asking, how can we change this?
So their idea was that, to set up facilities that had these levels of care. So the 23-hour sort of observation, so you can really figure out what's going on. If you need medical monitoring for 5 to 7 days, you can move into an inpatient bed. If you don't, if you can just get started on some other course of action while you're in the 23-hour bed, you can move right over the next day into intensive outpatient, which is also in this facility.
Every bit of support you could possibly need to get clean and stay clean, consolidated in one place. That sort of convenience is what Director Daphne Chenese-Rico hopes makes a difference long term.
I think that's such a big step, just to walk through the door and say, I need help. We're here to help them with the detox process, but we're also here to connect with them when that period is over. We make them aware of our intensive outpatient programs and that when they're done the detoxification period, it's not over. We're still going to be here for them as far as resources and support.
That's new. Another new concept, about half of Connection's staff here are people in recovery.
These centers used to be very medical and mostly nurses, and we do have a lot of nurses here as well, but the concept of having those recovery coaches, which is what we call them, to really help you to think about what do you need to do for the long term to make a difference in your life, that's new.
Carolyn Faust is what Connections calls a recovery coach.
It means that I'm their cheerleader. It means that I'm their guide. It means that I am a peer, which means that I have been where they are.
3.5 years clean from drugs and alcohol, Faust uses art therapy to illustrate how addiction hurts those you love.
And it also gives them evidence that they maybe know more than they realize about how to do this. Recovery Road was their opportunity to draw the road, to make it tangible. What do you have to have on it? Do you maybe have to go to the DMV? Do you maybe have to start the 12 steps? Do you maybe have to go find a job? What do you need as those supports to get you to the road to freedom? And the road to freedom is freedom from active addiction. I am the hope. I'm the physical evidence that recovery works, and our goal is to give them the hope that they can do that as well.
And the hope that this time, the recovery will stick. Connection CEO Kathy McKay estimates it'll cost about $2.5 million a year to run the detox center. But because offering levels of care in one place is new, McKay says the numbers are fluid. Now, the money is expected to come from the state for the uninsured, Medicaid, as well as insurance companies.
So is this new approach in effect at the Kirkwood Detox Center too?
It is.
And where does Delaware stand kind of in terms of the overall addiction epidemic?
So by the numbers, DHSS statistics show across the board increases in all 3 counties of people seeking treatment from state-run facilities. That's from 2014 to 2015. Now, off the bat, you think it's getting worse, but Division of Substance Abuse and Mental Health Director Mike Barbieri, he explains the uptick this way.
We're making more services available, so more people are accessing care. So I think that would be one indication of why the numbers are going up. And I think the other is because this is an epidemic, and it is really starting to spread out all over.
So last year, the General Assembly allocated about $4.5 million for additional treatment. How is that money going to be spent?
Okay, so Barbieri says the money will help the state increase its number of residential beds and to expand sober living environments sometime in the first quarter of next year. The state is also working on creating levels of care for outpatients, of people depending on where they are in their addictions. They might seek counseling 3 days a week for at least 3 hours or 5 days a week for 6 hours as part of a partial hospitalization program. Now, put it all together, Barbieri is optimistic that the state can start chipping away at some of these addiction numbers.
Let's hope so. All right, thanks, Shirley. This story and additional coverage related to Delaware's addiction epidemic can be found at newsworks.org/Delaware. While that facility may be revolutionary in the way it handles drug treatments, the Blood Bank of Delmarva is excited about something they hope will be revolutionary in their field: safer and easier ways to process blood donations. These vials of blood are being prepared for testing along the high-tech track system at the Blood Bank's Christiana Center. The track sensors read barcodes on each vial and send them where they need to go. Another machine uncaps and recaps the samples depending on their destination. Previously, all this testing prep work had been done by hand, a much more time-consuming process for the tests needed on hundreds of donations.
About 350 donors a day is what it takes us to keep our hospitals in supply.
The industry's changing drastically, and it's hard to keep up. And if we don't continue to change and adapt, we won't be able to be here long-term for the community.
Chris Nair has led the charge to make the Blood Bank of Delmarva a leader in innovation.
We are the first blood center in the country to have an automated track in our donor screening lab. And it allows us to be more efficient, more competitive, and position ourselves as being a regional testing provider for not only Blood Bank of Delmarva, but for other blood centers in the area.
With that efficiency, Nair hopes to expand the Blood Bank's footprint beyond the Delmarva Peninsula.
If you look at where Blood Bank of Delmarva is located along the I-95 corridor and the proximity we have to multiple airports in the region, if you just kind of look in the next 3 to 4 states, there's anywhere from 350,000 to 500,000 blood donor samples that we could be testing here that aren't being done here. So we're continuing to look at what are the opportunities that are really in the region and how do we work on getting some of that volume to come to us instead of go other places.
In addition to the new track system, the Blood Bank is also one of the first in the nation to utilize Intercept, a new technology that uses ultraviolet light and psoralen, a compound found in celery, to neutralize pathogens in donated platelets.
That can inactivate those pathogens and keep them from growing and multiplying. So it essentially makes the platelet product safer, and it minimizes the chance that a patient can get some kind of a bacterial or pathogen infection from the platelet product.
All of this is driven for one thing and one thing only, and that's patient safety, donor safety.
It is a major shift because it moves from trying to test for everything or continue to add tests to now we have a way to inactivate those pathogens, and I think over time we'll actually be doing less testing.
The Intercept treatment could enable donated platelets to stay on hospital shelves longer, extending the supply.
That could be a game changer. That could take that 5-day window and increase it to 7 days. And can you imagine with 48 hours more of an opportunity to use that product, the big difference it could make?
January is National Blood Donor Month, and the Blood Bank of Delmarva says out of 35% of the population who are eligible to donate, just 4 or 5% roll up their sleeves to give. They obviously would like to see that number increase and say they're willing to answer any questions or concerns you have that keep you from becoming a blood donor.
Coming up on First, Smyrna is the distilling capital of Delaware. What does it take to make whiskey in the first state? Learn about it in our Teach Me segment. And in First Experience, the car culture is strictly American. Check out the advertising that played into that culture. Lots going on in the news, which is why WHYY wanted to bring Rob Torno back again this week. Hey, Rob.
How you doing?
I'm doing well. So we were going over some predictions last week on State of Play, and it's no surprise that education is the hot topic. Tell me about your first cartoon.
So I have a new child, I have a new son, and education is sort of an issue with me. And I hear a lot about kindergarten, right? You know, testing, I think, is a good thing overall. You know, there needs to be a way to assess kids. But when you're having kindergarten kids taking homework home, it just seems to me to be a lapse of common sense. You know, there might need to be some tinkering with that. I just see that there's some problems there in sort of the overemphasis on sort of arithmetic and testing and not letting these kids play.
Well, outside of education, let's talk about sports. What about
All
the
right.
Eagles?
Yeah, well, the Eagles season is over. It ended poorly, and now these poor sports fans are forced to deal with teams that are even worse than the Eagles were. So it's going to be a cold winter and a boring, terrible offseason.
Yeah, I noticed that you put the Blue Rocks in.
Yeah, well, I mean, everyone loves the Blue Rocks. You know, they're fun. It's inexpensive. It's better than the Phillies at this point. So, you know, go to see a Blue Rocks game. Maybe not go to the Phillies game.
Okay, all right, good enough. He is Rob Torno, and you can follow him on Twitter at Rob Torno. You can also follow him online or on your mobile device through the pages of newsworks.org/Delaware. Thanks again, Rob, for being here.
First on the web can be found at WHYY.org/first. If you log on right now, you'll see this week's show and past shows there as well. If you have Comcast On Demand, you can find First along with many other great PBS shows.
The General Assembly returned to Dover this week for what promises to be another challenging year for Delaware's budget. And now we're turning the tables on Dace Blaskowitz for this edition of Dace on Business, and he'll be answering the questions. Dace has been in the financial services field for near 40 years. He's been a longtime WHYY contributor, and he's now co-director of the Caesar Rodney Institute's Center for Economic Policy and Analysis. Dace, welcome back.
Welcome back. The hunter becomes the hunted, if you will.
Role reversal. Here we go. So Dace, the DuPont cuts really have been in the news with the merger with Dow, and that's just one of the changes that will present fresh challenges to Delaware's economy. And you've been tracking this for a number of years and following the state budget and where we're at in the economy. There's really some significant challenges facing Delaware and the state budget.
Absolutely. We hope to get to that. Let's start at the beginning to run with it a little bit. DFAC that met in December, it's a key meeting. It's what the budget, what the governor and the legislators will use as a guideline for the budget. We at the Caesar Rodney Institute are taking some exception to those DFAC projections. If I can give you three real quick. The first would be their employment growth rate numbers seem extremely aggressive. The second is we had Bob Bird on this segment in May, I believe May 15th, and Bobby still serves as the lobbyist for the Escheat Group. Bobby said within 2 years, the state of Delaware would collect between $3 and $350 million from abandoned property. DFAC is projecting a nearly $500 million number. And that DFAC $4 billion also includes one-time money. One-time money. Remember back in June, everybody had a tizzy with $30 million. This $4 billion budget has a whopping $160 million from a one-time federal audit. So that $4 billion is a challenge for us, and we hope gathers scrutiny.
So as lawmakers look to approve a budget for FY 2017, you think maybe the number that they're looking at that they have to spend is inflated?
That would be an understatement. Let me add more fuel to the fire, and that is the Philly Fed. Federal Reserve Bank of Philadelphia came out in October. Numbers were released in November. That number is actually projecting a downturn in the spring of 2016. So you have rosy, optimistic numbers out of DFAC in the state of Delaware, and you have the Philly Fed saying all hands on deck.
So even in a regular year, there's sort of a desire, a want by lawmakers to sort of spend, and it's something that you've tracked over a number of years. The growth of Delaware's budget, of the spending that you really kind of take issue with.
Two different issues, to be a little bit cute here. Funny things can happen in an election year, so let's put some sarcasm to those numbers. But yes, the state of Delaware, we were talking before we got going, the debt per capita in the state of Delaware, let me get the legalese on the word choice correct. The state of Delaware debt capita as a percentage of personal income is at all-time highs, which seems like we're tapped out on the debt side. You can't borrow there. You got to make it grow. Projections from the Department of Labor, which is a Markell cabinet position, is at 1%. You can't make it grow. Governor Markell has spoke openly about you can't cut your way out of this mess. You have to grow it. But if you're not going to grow it and you're not going to you're not going to cut it, what's the answer?
So what is the answer then? What would you suggest?
Well, the Cesar Rodney Institute has a platform that I happen to believe strongly deserves a voice at the table here. And the first is you have to overdo the public school system. Something like 80% of the African American kids that graduate Delaware public schools are functionally illiterate. Businesses are not attracted to failure. The second one is you have to reduce the tax bite. We can debate the tax bite, but businesses are attracted to a tax-friendly state. If you're going to do manufacturing jobs, which have become suddenly important, you have to do right-to-work laws. And you got to become, as a state, more environmentally fair, at least friendly. State of Delaware's cost in the price of energy is, generally speaking, 25% above the region and the nation. That's a loser's hand when you call on businesses to bring the jobs to Delaware.
So a lot of challenges. Do you realistically see any of those items getting addressed within the next 6 months that the lawmakers are in session here in June as we close?
I'm not sure if I'm clairvoyant. I do that for a living as a financial services person. The challenges are that you have to have leadership out of Dover. We had Mike Castle on last month saying the same thing too. Touche to Mike Castle, absolutely. Tough decisions are on the come.
All right, we'll have to leave it there, and we will see what happens this session. He is Dace Blaskovitz, co-director of the Center for Economic Policy and Analysis at the Cesar Rodney Institute. Dace, thanks so much.
Thank you, Mark.
2 months ago, the Painted Stave Distilling Company of Smyrna made Delaware history. They released the first ever bourbon made in the first state. No, it's not moonshine, but there is a science to it. Avi Wolfman-Arndt is here with a Teach Me story on how it is all done. Hi, Avi.
Hey, Nichelle. So this was a landmark moment for Delaware's first craft distillery. And now that they have their first bottles ready, it's time to make another round of Diamond State bourbon whiskey. Let's learn what goes into the process. It may be a sleepy weekday morning in Smyrna, but inside Painted Stave Distilling, managing partner Mike Rasmussen is on the verge of big things.
So what we're starting today will, by about 7 days from now, be 120 gallons of bourbon filled into barrels, and it'll rest for 2 years before it's ready to be bottled.
Bourbon begins with grain, lots and lots of grain.
We're going to start off a batch by grinding up about 275 pounds of rye.
If you happen to be making Diamond State bourbon whiskey, you follow that up with 700 pounds of corn, and by turning on a very noisy mill. When it comes to making alcohol, ground zero is in fact the grinding process.
What we're doing is we're trying to get it ground up into the kind of the most efficient manner possible, which is a lot of surface area. This will allow it to cook quickly and break down very, very efficiently. That'll give us the most sugar, which ultimately gives us the most alcohol.
The grounds are then fed into a vat filled with 350 gallons of water. That substance will then be heated and turned into a mash, something along the lines of polenta. The substance then ferments for 3 or 4 days. That's when Rasmussen returns to run some tests.
Once a mash has been fermented, we're going to do a couple of things. The first thing we're going to do is pull a sample of that mash, bring it here into the lab, and run that sample through our centrifuge.
That separates out the yeast, leaving what distillers call the beer.
If you tried this, it would taste kind of like a very thin, sour beer.
Rasmussen tests the substance to make sure the yeast actually ate up all the sugars in the mash. Then he fires up the still, heats the liquid, and harvests the alcohol. If this looks kind of like a big science experiment to you, well, that's exactly how it looks to Ron Gomes.
My fun title is Modern Alchemist.
Before partnering with Rasmussen to open Painted Stave, Gomes was indeed a scientist.
My last paying job was assistant professor of orthopedics, Penn State College of Medicine.
When he was out of town for symposia, he would sneak off to craft distilleries. And now that he's opened his own, he's bringing scientific principles into the booze world.
I think where Mike and I apply science mostly right now is in methodology. So we have a number of experiments going on. We're a new producer. We're trying to understand grains. We're trying to understand aging in terms of our barrel finishing process. So we really have to apply a rigorous methodology to get something out of that.
Gomes and Rasmussen love to experiment. They created a gin with lavender notes, a vodka infused with scrapple. Each of these experiments begins with a hypothesis, then a prototype, then an attempt to scale up. It's a lot of the same principles you'd use in the lab, and it takes a lot of the same instincts.
Most things start with reading. So in science, you read the literature. You have to know what's done. You have to know what's been done, how it's been done, and then there's a certain amount of interpretation on that.
Much of what makes Gomes and Rasmussen's liquor distinct is in the interpretation. It's an art and a labor, but one that takes a scientist's commitment to the process.
So you might be wondering after all this, what's a painted stave? Well, a stave is the individual strip of wood that makes up a barrel. Back in the Prohibition days, shops would use painted staves to surreptitiously let customers know that alcohol was served at their establishment.
And that's pretty amazing. You got an inside look at how the distilling process actually works. Is there anything they would not share with you?
They were very open with us, but the one thing they told us is that if you go to a big commercial distiller, the one thing they will never share is their yeast. The yeast is often what gives the alcohol its distinct character, and that stuff's very carefully guarded.
Okay, so I understand it takes 2 years to actually age the bourbon. In your story, you said, where do they store it?
So in their case, in the Painted Staves case, they store it right there in the room that you saw. And there's a lot of weather fluctuations that are going to change the way the alcohol tastes. As a craft distiller, they embrace that inconsistency because it gives each vintage a different flavor. But at a big, commercial distiller, they're going to have a different system that ensures more consistency.
Interesting. For those of you at home, you can read more of Avi's work at newsworks.org/Delaware.
Cars are a huge part of the American culture. Advertising plays a big part in our decisions on what car to buy and when. A new exhibit at the Hagley Museum and Library looks at car advertising in the 20th century. First Experience takes to the open road for a look.
This exhibition is called Driving Desire, Automobile Advertising and the American Dream. We asked the question, Did you buy the car you needed, or did you buy the car you were sold? So it comes down to weighing out need and desire. Everything in this exhibition is part of Hagley's collection. We have a very specific one, the Z. Taylor Vincent collection of automobilia, and it is a tremendous collection of automobile advertising that spans really the entire history of automobiles from the late 19th century until the time of the collector's death in 2011.
Well, the collection is largely print-based. Advertisements which were clipped from magazines, automotive catalogs which came from dealerships and manufacturers, and there are photographs in the collection and magazines and books and so on. Cars don't sell themselves. You know, we all need cars, we all drive cars, and so of course you have to buy a car at some point. But a lot of money and a lot of effort goes into finding every way possible to make us part with our money.
The exhibition looks at really 6 primary themes or messages that advertisers use to try to get at your heart. We look at things like luxury, economy, safety, patriotism, buying American, style. What are the factors that drove you to make that decision?
We intended it to be fun, nostalgic, but we also wanted people to walk away thinking critically about their own experiences in purchasing automobiles. I hope they enjoy the exhibit, and primarily I want people to walk away thinking, and that's sort of what occurred to me in putting this exhibit together. It's really quite amazing to realize, to sit back and realize just how many advertisements there are over the years, and we don't even think about them.
This is such a big slice of American culture. I think you would be hard-pressed to find anybody, any American who doesn't have a car story, particularly something about their first car, their memory of their first car. In the end, we want them to walk away asking questions about decisions they've made, particularly around the car, but really recognizing the impact that marketing has on the decisions that we make. There is so much eye candy here, it's hard to take it all in. So this might be an experience that you want to do more than once.
This is a huge exhibit with interactive displays that you can see through October 2nd of this year. The car featured in the exhibit is a 1958 Metropolitan 1500, painted in sunshine yellow. The car was made by Nash Motors, which later merged with Hudson Motors to become the American Motor Company. You can get more information on the exhibit when you visit Hagley on the web at hagley.org.
Really some great stuff there. We join you twice next week. The Delaware State of the State will be broadcast Thursday night at 7:30. Then Friday on First, we report on a canine training program that could help reduce the state's recidivism rate.
And we'll have a report on the latest measures taken in Delaware to keep the chicken population disease free. That is First for this week. We thank you for watching. For Avi Wolfman-Arndt, Shirley Min, and Mark Eichman, I'm Nichelle Polston. We'll see you Thursday and Friday. Have a good week.